Last week, we reported the bombshell news that Robert Wagner has been named a person of interest in the death of his wife, legendary actress Natalie Wood.
A woman's voice piercing the cold night air. A desperate cry echoing across dark water. Help me, someone please help me. And then, silence. No rescue. No explanation. No accountability. For over 4 decades, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses has been lying at the bottom of the ocean while the people who were supposed to protect her walked free. Natalie Wood did not simply slip off a boat. The evidence, the witnesses, the inconsistencies, they all point to something far more disturbing. And after more than 40 years, the pieces of this puzzle are finally coming together into a picture that is deeply, profoundly troubling. What really happened the night Natalie Wood died? Stay with me, because the truth is darker than anything Hollywood ever put on screen. Natalie Wood was not just a movie star. She was a phenomenon. From the time she was a small child performing in front of cameras to the moment she became one of the most recognizable faces in the world, Natalie carried herself with a grace and emotional depth that felt almost otherworldly. Born on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco as Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko, she was the daughter of Russian immigrants who had crossed oceans searching for a better life. Her father Nikolai worked modest jobs, and her mother Maria carried dreams that were larger than their circumstances allowed. And it was Maria who would set the course of Natalie's entire existence, for better and for worse. Maria was convinced, with an intensity that bordered on obsession, that her daughter was destined for greatness. By the time Natalie was 4 years old, her mother was already pushing her in front of cameras, pursuing small roles in local productions and whispering to anyone who would listen that this child was something special. She was not entirely wrong. Natalie had an extraordinary quality that the camera seemed to love. Even as a young girl, she could communicate emotion with startling authenticity, drawing audiences into her world without effort. But Maria's ambition came at a price. There are documented accounts of Maria using emotionally cruel tactics to manipulate Natalie's performances on set, including deliberately causing her daughter real distress when she could not produce tears on cue. It was exploitation dressed up as opportunity, and Natalie experienced it before she was old enough to understand what was being taken from her. Despite that difficult foundation, Natalie's talent carried her forward. At age 8, she appeared in the holiday classic Miracle on 34th Street, playing a sharp, skeptical little girl who questioned the very existence of Santa Claus. It was a breakthrough that made her a household name almost overnight and launched one of the most impressive careers in Hollywood history. But success at that level, achieved that young, rarely comes without cost. Natalie worked punishing hours throughout her childhood, sometimes filming 6 days a week for up to 12 hours a day, while simultaneously trying to maintain some semblance of a normal education and life. She rarely had the luxury of simply being a child. Every smile, every tear, every emotional moment was shaped by industry pressures and maternal expectations. The girl on screen looked happy and carefree. The girl behind the scenes was anything but. As she moved into her teenage years, Natalie began fighting to shed the child star image that had defined her. That transformation arrived powerfully with her role in Rebel Without a Cause in 1955, where she starred alongside the legendary James Dean. Playing Judy, a teenager wrestling with loneliness and emotional abandonment, Natalie gave a performance of such raw honesty that it earned her an Academy Award nomination at just 17 years old. The industry took notice. Overnight, she was no longer just a cute face from a holiday movie. She was a serious actress with something profound to say. She followed that success with equally demanding roles, including West Side Story and Splendor in the Grass, both of which showcased her extraordinary emotional range and cemented her reputation as one of the most compelling performers of her generation. From the outside, Natalie would seem to have everything a person could want: fame, talent, wealth, and a love story that played like something written for the silver screen. Her relationship with Robert Wagner had the kind of romantic mythology that Hollywood manufactured dreams from. She had allegedly pointed to a photograph of him as a little girl and told her mother she would marry him someday. And she did. Their first wedding in December of 1957 was celebrated across the country as the union of 2 golden stars, a pairing so perfect it almost defied belief. Magazines adored them. Gossip columns couldn't get enough. They were the couple everyone wanted to be, and for a time, even the people closest to them allowed themselves to believe in the fairy tale. But fairy tales have a way of unraveling. Beneath the polished surface of their marriage, something far less glamorous was taking shape. Insiders who knew the couple during those early years have described a dynamic marked by jealousy, insecurity, and an uncomfortable imbalance of power. By the early 1960s, Natalie was the undeniable star of the two. She had Oscar nominations, critical praise, and industry respect that Wagner simply could not match. He was primarily known at that time as a television actor, and those who watched them closely said the gap in their public profiles created a quiet but persistent tension. Wagner reportedly struggled with Natalie's success in ways that sometimes manifested as possessiveness and control, particularly when it came to the men she worked with professionally. Their first marriage ended in divorce in 1962, under circumstances that were never fully explained to the public. The rumors that circulated at the time were explosive by the standards of that era, but Natalie, ever protective of her image, said very little. What is clear is that something fundamental broke between them during those years, something that should perhaps have kept them apart permanently. Instead, after a decade of separate lives, failed relationships, and quiet yearning, they found their way back to each other. In January 1972, Natalie and Robert Wagner reconnected, and by July of that same year, they were married again, this time on a yacht off the coast of Malibu. It was a quieter ceremony, more intimate and personal than their first. To those who loved Natalie, the ocean setting must have carried a note of irony, given her lifelong and well-documented terror of dark water. That fear of water was not a casual quirk or a minor anxiety. It was a deep, visceral phobia that Natalie had carried since childhood. Her mother, in one of the more disturbing episodes of Natalie's early life, had told her as a girl that a psychic had predicted she would one day die by drowning. Whether or not Maria genuinely believed that prophecy, the effect on her young daughter was lasting and severe. Natalie was afraid of open water. She avoided swimming. She was uncomfortable on boats and never developed any confidence around them. People who knew her throughout her adult life consistently described this fear as something real and significant, not something she downplayed or laughed off. And yet, fate or something more deliberate placed her on a yacht, in cold weather, at night, in conditions that matched every aspect of what terrified her most. Before we arrive at that final night, there is another chapter of Natalie's story that must be told, because it adds crucial context to everything that followed. In 2021, Natalie's younger sister Lana Wood published a book that shook the entertainment world. In it, Lana revealed that Natalie had once confided a deeply traumatic secret to her, that as a 16-year-old rising star, she had been assaulted by Kirk Douglas, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood at that time. According to Lana, their mother Maria had arranged a meeting between Natalie and Douglas, framing it as a career opportunity, a chance to make connections with someone who could elevate her profile in the industry. What Natalie experienced instead left her visibly shaken. She returned home with her clothes disheveled and pulled her little sister aside. The words she whispered were brief and devastating. "He hurt me, Lana." Natalie carried that trauma for the rest of her life, telling almost no one and never speaking publicly about what had happened. This was not unusual for the era. In the Hollywood of the 1950s, powerful men operated within a system that was specifically designed to protect them. Studios, publicists, agents, and lawyers worked in concert to manage reputations and silence inconvenient truths. Young women who dared to speak out risked their careers, their reputations, and sometimes their safety. The culture demanded silence, and Natalie, like so many others before and after her, complied. But silence has consequences. Trauma that is buried does not disappear. It reshapes how a person sees themselves, how they relate to others, how they understand power and safety and love. Understanding what happened to Natalie at 16 is essential to understanding the patterns that defined her adult life, including her complicated, deeply troubled relationship with Robert Wagner. Their second marriage, which began with such apparent optimism, quickly showed signs of reverting to old dynamics. Friends and observers who spent time with them during those years described a relationship still burdened by Wagner's possessiveness and need for control. He reportedly wanted Natalie to slow down professionally, to step back from the demanding roles she loved and focus instead on domestic life. There were accounts of tension around her working relationships, particularly her friendships with male co-stars. Arguments were described as frequent and sometimes heated, though the full extent of what happened behind closed doors was known only to those inside their world. By November of 1981, Natalie was working on a film called Brainstorm, co-starring with Christopher Walken. She was passionate about the project and deeply invested in her performance. That professional excitement, it seems, became another source of friction. On the evening of November 27, 1981, Natalie, Wagner, Walken, and Dennis Davern, the captain of their yacht the Splendor, went ashore at Catalina Island for dinner at a local restaurant. Witnesses who were there that night described a group that was drinking heavily throughout the meal. The atmosphere at the table was not relaxed. Wagner and Walken became embroiled in an argument centered on Natalie's career. Walken, direct and outspoken, reportedly encouraged Natalie to continue pursuing her work and to protect her professional independence. Wagner, by all accounts, was agitated by that message, feeling that Natalie's priorities should lie closer to home. The argument did not resolve itself over dinner. It followed the group back to the yacht. Once aboard the Splendor, the tension escalated dramatically. Dennis Davern, who was present throughout and who has since spoken extensively about that night, described an atmosphere thick with conflict. Wagner was angry and growing more so as the evening wore on. At some point during the argument, Wagner reportedly picked up a wine bottle and smashed it on the table, a gesture of rage that brought the conflict into physical territory. Davern has said that what followed remains deeply troubling to him, and his account of the hours after that moment contradicts Wagner's version of events in significant and disturbing ways. Wagner's story, as he has told it over the years, is relatively straightforward. He says that Natalie went to bed, and that when he later went to check on her, she was simply gone. He characterizes her disappearance as inexplicable, as something that caught him completely off guard. But Davern tells a different story. According to the yacht's captain, Wagner was aware far sooner than he admitted that something was wrong. And rather than immediately raising the alarm, Wagner allegedly instructed Davern not to turn on the searchlights, not to alert nearby boats, and not to contact the Coast Guard. The reasoning, as Davern has described it, was that Wagner wanted to wait, to handle the situation quietly before involving authorities. That decision, if Davern's account is accurate, was catastrophic. Cold water is unforgiving. The window of survival for someone in the ocean at night is measured not in hours but in minutes. Every moment that passed without a search being launched was a moment that could not be recovered. The Coast Guard was not contacted until around 3:30 in the morning, and the captain of the rescue boat that eventually recovered Natalie's body later said he was not called until after 5 a.m. That represents a gap of more than 4 hours between the time Natalie was last accounted for and the time any official search began. 4 hours. In those circumstances, the delay was not merely a mistake. It was potentially the difference between life and death. While those on board the Splendor remained quiet, something extraordinary was happening on a nearby boat. A couple, John Payne and Marilyn Wayne, were anchored not far from the Splendor that night. Around midnight, Marilyn was awakened by sounds that she has never been able to forget. A woman's voice, coming from the direction of the water, crying out over and over again. Pleading. Desperate. Marilyn woke John, and together they listened. They heard a man's voice respond, calm, almost dismissive, and then the woman's cries stopped. Marilyn was so disturbed by what she had heard that she attempted to contact authorities the following day. She was never called to testify. Her account was never formally incorporated into the investigation. It was set aside, along with a great deal of other inconvenient evidence, while the official narrative of accidental drowning was assembled and closed. When Natalie's body was recovered, it was floating approximately a mile from the Splendor. She was wearing a flannel nightgown and a heavy down jacket, clothing entirely inconsistent with someone who had intentionally gone out on the water. The small dinghy attached to the yacht was found beached nearby, but its lines were still partially tied, suggesting it had not been properly operated. The official explanation that emerged, that Natalie must have gone out to secure the dinghy, slipped, and fallen into the water, has always been deeply unsatisfying to those who knew her. Natalie Wood, a woman with a paralyzing lifelong fear of dark water, would not have gone out alone in the middle of the night, in rough weather, after drinking heavily, to attend to a small boat. Those who loved her have said so consistently and emphatically. The autopsy complicated matters further. Natalie's blood alcohol level was well above the legal driving limit, and she had traces of motion sickness medication and painkillers in her system, substances that would have significantly amplified the effects of the alcohol and impaired her coordination and judgment. But the more troubling findings were physical. Her body bore multiple bruises on her arms, legs, and face, along with an abrasion on her left cheek. Forensic experts who reviewed the autopsy results have debated for years whether these injuries were consistent with a fall into the water or whether they suggested something more violent had occurred before Natalie entered the ocean. The original coroner ruled the death an accidental drowning, but he later acknowledged publicly that unresolved questions remained. In 2012, those questions were formally acknowledged when the Los Angeles Coroner's Office amended Natalie's death certificate to list the cause as drowning and other undetermined factors, a quiet but significant admission that the original conclusion was incomplete. The case has never fully closed, despite what the official record might suggest. In 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department formally named Robert Wagner a person of interest in Natalie's death. That designation came after investigators, including Lieutenant John Corina, publicly stated that Wagner's account of the events of that night was not consistent with what other witnesses described. Wagner has declined to cooperate with investigators. He has refused interviews and avoided direct questioning about key moments from that evening. He has never been charged with any crime. He remains, to this day, protected by a combination of his own silence, the passage of time, and the particular way in which powerful people in this country are insulated from accountability. In more recent developments, the case has attracted renewed attention. A former deckhand who was working on a nearby vessel in November of 1981 has come forward to describe hearing sounds of a violent argument aboard the Splendor, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a woman in distress. His account, suppressed for decades by a combination of personal fear and institutional indifference, adds another layer to a body of witness testimony that has never been properly examined under oath. Investigative author Marty Rulli, who has spent years researching the case, has argued publicly that there is now sufficient evidence to convene a grand jury investigation, a formal legal process that would allow for a comprehensive review of all available material, with the power to compel testimony from individuals who have so far avoided direct scrutiny.